Today I'm going to walk you through the notes that I took on Dr. Andrew Huberman's podcast on controlling your dopamine for motivation, focus, and satisfaction. Let's get right into it. Dopamine is the currency of foraging and seeking. Food, water, mates, things that will provide sustenance in the short term and extend our species in the long term. Dopamine is the driver for us to seek things. Someone with motivation and drive versus someone without, you want to know the difference? The difference is predominantly the amount of dopamine circulating in their system. Dopamine controls motivation, drive, craving, time perception, and ability to sustain effort and be happy over a long period. That last one is really why you should want to dial into your dopamine and know more about it. Knowing more about it will help you dial into it. Dopamine is a molecule in the brain and body that when released makes you look outside yourself, pursue things outside yourself, crave things outside yourself. If you are lazy and lethargic, okay, you're in a low dopamine state. If you're motivated and excited or even scared, for example, say it's your first time skydiving, okay, you're panicking, you're scared, you are in a high dopamine state. There's a lot of dopamine, that molecule dopamine that's produced in the brain and the body, circulating around your body. How much dopamine you experience from something depends on your baseline level of dopamine when you arrive there and the precious dopamine peaks, okay? So if you're motivated or outgoing, someone that attacks life and doesn't wait for life to come to you, you have a lot of dopamine. You're in a high dopamine state, okay, which is what we all want to achieve. So what is a baseline level of dopamine? Baseline dopamine refers to the normal or typical amount of dopamine activity in the brain when an individual is at rest. This is from Wikipedia or something. I just pasted this in because he didn't make this clear, but I want to myself. Or not engaged in stimulating activities. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a crucial role in various functions, including mood regulation, motivation, and pleasure. Individual baseline dopamine levels can vary, and disruptions in this baseline can be associated with certain neurological and psychiatric conditions. So when we experience or crave something really desirable, really exciting, what happens after that indulgence is quite interesting. What happens after that indulgence is that our baseline level of dopamine drops. Our level of baseline dopamine is to do with yesterday's experience and our genetics, the two things that shape your baseline level of dopamine. Things that will increase dopamine. This is fascinating, okay? And we'll link into, the spike and then the drop below baseline that I just spoke about. This is really interesting. This will sort of help with that. Things that will increase dopamine. Chocolate will increase baseline level of dopamine 1.5 times, but goes away after a few minutes or seconds. Sex, both the pursuit and the act of sex, increases dopamine 2 times above baseline level. It doubles the amount of dopamine circulating in the blood. That's pretty cool. Number 3, nicotine. Cigarettes increases dopamine 2.5 times above baseline. However, once again, it is very, very short-lived. Cocaine, similar, 2.5 times above your baseline. Amphetamine, a drug that increases dopamine, like it's designed to increase dopamine, increases your dopamine by 10 times. So it's fairly common sense, fairly logical. Exercise will increase your dopamine as long as you enjoy it. If you enjoy it, it doubles your dopamine, okay, above baseline. If you don't enjoy it, there'll actually be a very low increase / no increase in your dopamine level. I know, mad. So if you can think of some aspect of exercise that you enjoy, whether it be weightlifting, running, swimming, cycling, there are so many things you can do nowadays. There's no excuse. We have technology, we have the resources to find something that, one might enjoy. Find it, do it. Be physically active, because if you exercise in a way that brings you fulfillment and enjoyment, your dopamine will double, okay? It will 2 times. Let's talk about caffeine. Caffeine increases your dopamine a little bit, but actually enables you to experience more of the dopamine effects, which is quite interesting. Pre-workout and taking energy drinks before exercise are 2 activities that can actually cause a sharp dopamine increase. Sharp increases in dopamine, okay? However, when combined, so when you take pre-workout and energy drinks, maybe a Powerade, a Lucozade, whatever it may be, that will actually cause motivational issues after the workout. So you see all those TikToks of like gym bros or gym gals when they come back from the gym, and it's like, I don't know what to do with my life. I hit the gym, I'm all hyped, they go to the gym, and then they come back and they're just like, they just lie on their bed. I know it's obviously a joke, but that is actually, I thought that was really interesting. That is linked to the fact, very likely, the fact that they've taken pre-workout and energy drinks, they've been so hyped, and they've had a sharp motivational decrease after their workout. So the point Huberman makes is you can do the occasional pre-workout, but if it's too much, then your capacity to release dopamine and your overall motivation will take a massive hit. Pleasure/pain balance. When we seek something we really like or want to indulge in, for example, eating some chocolate, there's some pleasure, but then there's a bit of pain that exceeds the pleasure, and it's subtle, and we experience it as wanting more of that thing. So every time you have a chocolate bar, when you have like one bit of dairy milk, so you have one piece, you want more of it, don't you? Well, I'm going to explain why you want more of it. Pain is coming from the lack of dopamine that follows. So we can only release so much dopamine from the pool that has been synthesized. There's only so much dopamine within us, okay? For example, it's like when we order a product that's out of stock, there's stuff that's not ready to be released until later. So it's why after a huge increase in dopamine, for example, eating a whole dairy milk bar, your baseline level will drop, because there isn't a lot of dopamine around to keep your baseline level high, to keep it going. You've just used up your dopamine reserve. So you've had a chocolate bar, massive dopamine spike. Okay, you basically used up all your dopamine, and what goes up must come down. I've said this before, but not only does it come down, so say your baseline level's here, it goes up, but it goes below your baseline level of dopamine because there just isn't as much dopamine in your system. Addiction. When someone pursues a huge increase in dopamine, leading to severe drops in baseline because of the depletion of ready releasable pool of dopamine, that ready releasable pool of dopamine, when it's been saturated, it's not around to be released, and that is what makes you feel a bit lousy. So addiction, so let's just take chocolate. If you're addicted to chocolate, that craving doesn't stop because your dopamine has been depleted, so you have that sharp spike, and then it goes below your baseline level. You just want more of it, so you want to do it again. So sure enough, you have another piece of chocolate, another sharp spike of dopamine, even lower and lower and lower and lower, and your baseline level will just go like that. That's the same. Obviously, I've taken a very soft version of addiction. It's the same for alcohol, drugs, everything like that, addiction. So people that pursue that dopamine releasing substance or activity, again, to get that dopamine peak or increase that baseline, in actual fact, not only don't increase that peak, the peak doesn't increase by as much, but also it lowers and lowers that baseline, as I just said. And all they're doing is just depleting their dopamine reserves. You're depleting the amount of dopamine you have in the system, ready to go. So you end up without much pleasure at all. For example, if you're addicted to video games, only video games will give you that excitement and dopamine release playing, rather than other behaviors, for example, schoolwork, sport, and relationships. So you lose interest in them. So you love video games so much, that ends up becoming the only thing that gives you dopamine. You don't get that same dopamine spike from anything else. Like nothing gives you even the remotest amount of pleasure because you use up all your dopamine reserves on those video games, making schoolwork, relationships, friends relatively seem insignificant, boring, dull. You're not going to have any motivation to do them, okay? So eventually, now this is a really key message, you stop getting a dopamine release from video games. Say you are an addict of video games, you stop getting that dopamine release in the first place, which drops you into depression. Because already you're not interested in anything else. You're not interested in relationships, schoolwork, or anything, because relative to the video games, they weren't as good. They weren't giving you the same dopamine, so you were hooked on video games. That's all you did. Regardless of that, video games will eventually, and I don't know, he didn't give a specific time period, but I mean, I'd imagine sort of half a year to a year, you will stop getting those peaks in dopamine. You will stop getting pleasure and enjoyment from video games or whatever it is that you're addicted to. So how do we cure addiction? What do we do if we have a sharp drop in our baseline? Well, one way to replenish the release of the pool of dopamine is not to engage in dopamine-seeking behaviors. So you can either go cold turkey, so just step away from all the habits that give you, that cause sharp spikes in dopamine, or you can reduce them gradually, which, those are essentially the two ways to cure any addiction. How to achieve dopamine peaks without dropping baseline, for example, with exercise, sex, coffee, food, etc. The key lies in intermittent dopamine release. So obviously all those things, exercise, sex, drinking coffee is quite good for your cardiovascular health as well, I've heard. Food gives you a dopamine spike. All these things that you have to do and are good for you as well, those give you dopamine spikes. So how do we ensure that our baseline level doesn't drop too much? We have to do them intermittently. So don't expect or chase high dopamine release when you engage in those activities, and do them intermittently. So what I mean by intermittently is change up your exercise routine. One day do cardio, next day do resistance training, next day do swimming. Change it up. If you do cardio every single day, then first of all, it's boring as hell. You're going to be less motivated to do it, but also your baseline will just drop. But if it's intermittent, then it won't drop as much, and you'll still get that peak, and then it will slowly come down again. Don't expect or chase high dopamine release when you engage in those activities. That's the other thing. So if you expect a high dopamine release, you'll be disappointed, and the chances are your baseline level will go down as well. Intermittent schedules keep you motivated in terms of the fact that sometimes lots, sometimes little, and sometimes medium amounts of dopamine is released. For example, intermittent success at casinos is a very good example of that, because if you are constantly successful, if you're constantly getting that dopamine release, that dopamine peak and drop, then you're going to want to stay. You're going to want to keep going. And you're not going to want to come away from the casino. But if you do it intermittently and have success one day, and then a week later you have a bit more success, and then 3 weeks later a bit more, your baseline level won't drop as significantly. You won't get such a sharp increase in dopamine and then drop. It will be much less severe, okay? So how do we use this in life outside of the casino? Don't have a specific schedule of when dopamine will be high, low, or medium. It needs to be random. Random is the key. Intermittence, randomness is your best friend with dopamine. Monitor the amount of dopamine you get from activities and modulate them. For example, one day, go to the gym, listen to a podcast. The next day, go to the gym, listen to music. The day after that, combine the two. Mix it up. Because if you just listen to music, if you just listen to Rihanna 1 week, the next week you're going to need to listen to even more stimulating music whilst you're pushing for that PR. You're going to need to listen to sort of a Rihanna umbrella hard style that we all like, gibberish like, and then even that you're going to need to listen to funk music, and it goes on and on and on. You're going to need a sharper spike in dopamine so that you can get through that last set. So the key is to do it intermittently. Podcasts, music, mix it up, okay? Or go cold turkey and listen to no music, because that will make you appreciate the music even more, which will make it more likely that you hit those PRs and you get that hypertrophy and you get that muscle growth that you crave, or those PRs that you want to hit, whatever it may be. Cold water exposure. Every time there is a adrenaline release, dopamine rises up to 2.5 times baseline. So on a par with cocaine, okay? Only this time, it takes 3 hours to drop to baseline. So cocaine, nicotine, coffee, sex, everything just comes straight back down. But cold water exposure increases your dopamine by 2.5 times and then takes 3 hours to come back down. So you're in that sort of high dopamine state for so long. 3 hours. It's great. Yeah? So cold water exposure. The next time you get into a cold shower and you don't want to be there, just remind yourself, the amount of dopamine in my body is going to be much, much higher. Let's talk about work. When we give ourselves or receive rewards after task completion, we tend to associate the task with less pleasure. You have to tell yourself, even if you're in a huge amount of pain whilst you're doing the work, that what you're doing is pleasureful, is great. The effort is worthwhile. It's fulfilling. Convince yourself, manipulate your brain to tell yourself that it's pleasureful, even though you're in an absolute, mind-boggling, painful experience, okay? Whatever it is that you're doing. Over time, you can actually evoke dopamine release from the friction and challenge that you happen to be in. This is really, really key. You cannot reward the friction whilst you're in that effort of doing the task if you're focused on the reward, the end result. So if you have an end result, if you say, right, if I do this task, I'm going to have that chocolate bar, you can't actually evoke a dopamine release when you're actually doing the task itself, which is what you want. You want that dopamine release when you're doing the task. You want stress, pain, whatever to be pleasurable. You want effort to be enjoyable. You want to evoke that dopamine whilst doing the hard task. And that's the problem with setting goals. And that's the problem with setting big rewards after doing that task, because you're so focused on the reward, you're so focused on that dopamine spike that you'll get after you've done it, X, Y, or Z thing, that you won't actually enjoy the process, which is super, super important for productivity and focus. If you say you're going to do the hard things and push and push and push and push for that end goal that comes later, not only do you enjoy the process less, but you actually make it more painful whilst engaging in it and make it worse for yourself for the next time, as you need more and more of a stimulating reward. You need more music, you need more coffee, you need more chocolate, you need more treats, etc. just to study, just to run, just to go to the gym once. Now let's talk about growth mindset, learning to access the rewards from effort. In the moments of the most intense friction, you tell yourself, this is very painful, and I'm quoting him, and because it's painful, it will evoke an increase in dopamine later, meaning it will increase my baseline in dopamine. You also have to tell yourself that in the moment that you are doing it by choice and because you love it. I'm doing this piece of work, I'm doing this exercise, I'm doing this cold approach, I'm doing this whatever it may be, this project, because I love it. Even if you hate it, tell yourself that you love it. And as Huberman said, it may be lying to yourself, but it's lying in the context that you want to feel better, more pleasurable, and get that dopamine release so you can be more focused and productive whilst doing that piece of work. The ability to access pleasure from effort is the most powerful effect of dopamine and our biology of dopamine. Don't spike dopamine before or after effort, but learn to spike it as a result of effort itself. An example of this is intermittent fasting. When we're about to ingest food, our dopamine spikes. What reduces baseline dopamine level? Melatonin. Viewing bright lights between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. has been shown to reduce level of dopamine for several days after light exposure. Close social connections that evoke oxytocin release, so the romantic type, the parent-child and so forth, and close friendship results in a dopamine release as well. So oxytocin is essential for dopamine release. Actionable step for you. Pursue quality, healthy relationships. For the evolution of our species, it's important to seek social connections, and hence why there is a dopamine spike when you do. So, to wrap up, in conclusion, I got a dopamine spike from making this video, from the pain, the effort, the having to set it up, the lighting and so forth, of the scripting of making this video. Because I convinced myself that the effort and the pain is pleasurable, and the reward comes from the work itself. I'm not rewarding myself after this, I'm not rewarding myself before, I'm rewarding myself in the process, trusting the process, enjoying the process. It's what all the greats say. I think Kobe Bryant summarized it quite well in the podcast, I seem to remember. He said it's not the destination. I'm not quoted directly here, but he said it's not the destination, it's the journey. And it's quite cliche, but it's nonetheless true. And Andrew Huberman has supported in his podcast here why it is true. I'll see you in the next one.